Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Control Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Omid Miri. I am the chair of the committee. Thanks for coming. Just going to run through some housekeeping points before we get on to the items on the agenda. So the meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube channel. So by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. So please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the staff fire exit, which is behind me to my right. And officers will direct you to the assembly point, which is in Riverside Gardens. And there are toilets on my left-hand side. And please, can officers introduce themselves before speaking? And can everyone make sure that their mics are on? And that's the button on the right-hand side. Your mic will go green, which will let you know that it's on. So now I'll move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. And we do have apologies from Councillor Alex Carmel, none others. Item 2, declaration of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? No? No declarations of interest. Before I move on to item 3, Matt, if you wouldn't mind, for the benefit of everyone that's here today, if you could just explain what the addendum is and sort of how that works and that it's sort of standard procedure, if you would. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm Matt Butler, Assistant Director of Development Management at Hammersmith and Fulham Council. The addendum purpose is to basically capture any late representations that we receive from consultees or members of the public. It's also used to clarify any corrections or errors in the officer's report, or to add any additional information that may be missing at the time of final print. So it's basically just to capture all those elements. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you. In that case, we'll move on to item 3, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July, 2024. Are the minutes agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. If that can be noted. And that brings us to item 4, which is 1A Ravenscourt Road. And Neil, could you please introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application, as I say, relates to 1A Ravenscourt Road. The proposal is for the demolition of an existing single-storey office building and the erection of a replacement Part 1, Part 2-storey single-family dwelling house, along with related alterations. The site is highlighted in red here on the plan. It is on the west side of Ravenscourt Road, close to the junction with King Street, which is to the south. The green buildings annotated on the plan are buildings of merit, and the site is within the Ravenscourt Estate Green Conservation Area. Just got some views of the site. This is an aerial view looking to the north. See the single-storey building here, and then a yard area and a rear garden area. Again, this is the view looking to the west. You see here the side backs onto properties on King Street here, and then particularly onto number 1 Ravenscourt Road, which I'm indicating there. This is a view of the existing site. You see the single-storey building here. You have the Polish Centre looming large behind. And then this is the view looking towards number 1 Ravenscourt Road, which is here. The trellis and the wall here are the boundary between the application site and 1 Ravenscourt Road. And this is just a view again looking towards this is the entrance to the site here on the left. And then on the right, you have the driveway for number 1 Ravenscourt Road. And this is the fence that separates the 2 sites. And then that just shows the relationship of the houses going beyond the properties. So there are largely 2 stories. And then that's just a view towards the rear of King Street. Again, about some 2-storey buildings and some 3-storey buildings there. These are some views of the within the existing site. It's in poor condition at the moment. Again, this is then looking to the east, looking out from the application site. And this is the view from the garden to the south of the building. Inside, the building's in poor condition, as you can see. A couple of images that were provided by the objectors at number 1 Ravenscourt Road. This is the view of the site from the conservatory in the garden. So the site is here on the left, on the right of the photograph, the wall and the trellis. So it's the boundary. And this is the view from number 1's kitchen window. See, looking towards the site. The structure on the right of the window there is their own conservatory garden room. Then you can see the trellis there, which is the boundary. And finally, then that's the boundary of the site from within number 1, again within 1A, looking towards the site. So you've got Polish Centre in the background. You can just make out the neighbour's conservatory or garden room there. The proposed development shown here, this is the street scene elevation. So you'll have a 2-storey building with a pitched roof that's been reduced in height. The single-storey element to the north is kept at the same height and size as the existing structure, and then a single-storey element to the south. You can see here the bulk of the Polish Centre behind. And then on the neighbouring property number 1, this is the garden, conservatory or garden room. And then the main wall where the kitchen window is situated there. And just a slightly bigger view of that. The red dotted line here was one of the previous planning applications that was refused, and the structure has been lowered in height now to this level that is shown. And again, this view shows a much earlier iteration of the scheme, which was a much considerably higher building. So the building has come down in height through the planning history. I mean, there've been a number of applications refused back around about 2019, 2020, and 2022. There were appeals against those refusals, the appeals were dismissed, albeit that the planning inspectorate did not agree with all the council's reasons for refusal. And then, say the building with this scale and massing was the subject of a non-determination appeal last year for a replacement building to be used as an office. This was considered by the planning inspectorate to be acceptable, and its impacts on the neighbours were agreed to be acceptable, and planning permission was approved for an office redevelopment. That was approved, I think, 23rd of August last year, so that is still extant now until August 2026. So the current house is using the same framework, same scale and massing. You just see the floor plan here. You have an off-street car parking space, a garden area. This is the single-storey element here, and a single-storey element then to the south with a rear garden area. First floor, then there'll be bedrooms. You see a flat roof of the southern structure. They're planning to some photo PV panels on the roof. The roof to the north then may well be a green roof. And then it's got a shallow sort of pitched roof that is kept low with roof lights to get light into the bedrooms. You can hear this is the looking north. This is the elevation facing King Street. You see the low roof. Again, the red dotted line indicates the height of a previous scheme. And again, this is the view from this will be the view from number 1 Ravenscourt Road. And then you see a section through, so you can see the roof lights open upwards, they're above eye height. just to get light into the rooms. Single-story element stays same height and is lower than the conservatory next door. Officers have recommended that planning permission be granted for the structure subject to the legal agreement in the form of a unilateral undertaking, which would prevent the occupiers of the house being able to obtain on-street car parking permits, which is one of the concerns raised by the local residents. They have their own off-street space, so they will be able to park without disrupting the street. We've also agreed that details of a charging point for the off-street space be provided, sort of future-proofing that space. I would like to draw your attention to the addendum. There's some clarifications there to do with the history and where there were some errors that were pointed out in correspondence we received yesterday, late representation regarding a more recent application, which is currently the subject of a planning appeal. The officer report indicated that that development was identical to this. It is the case that the drawing had been revised, but those drawings hadn't been uploaded, so it's a bit confusing, and we've tried to clarify this with the addendum, and we've notified the person who wrote to us as well. We're also adding a new condition 29, which requires the details of the active electric vehicle charging point to be submitted and approved prior to occupation. Yep, the recommendations are on the screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Now we'll move on to speakers. I'd just like some clarification if possible. So Nova, you have 3 minutes to speak, and we have Councillor Collins. So you both have time to speak separately if that's what you'd prefer to do. I can see you're nodding. So in which case, Nova, if you'd like to come to the front just here. And when you're ready, you have 3 minutes, and it's just the button on the right-hand side. Thank you.
Okay, try again. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. You can take a seat as well if you'd like.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to check again. Can you hear me? Right. Chair and members of the Planning Committee, thank you for allowing me to speak. I live at 1 Ravenscourt Road, immediately to the north of the application site. My home and quality of my life are directly affected by the proposal, so I feel compelled to talk tonight. I have lived here for 25 years. In this time, I've loved my home, have thoroughly enjoyed the open, southerly aspect, the pleasant outlook, the privacy and direct sunlight into both my garden and the windows which face the application site. The current buildings on the application site are low, and whilst not particularly attractive, are benign and have little impact. Since 2015, I and my now late husband have been faced with a relentless series of 12 applications or appeals that have caused us great stress and worry because of the potential devastating effect of the proposals upon our living conditions, amenities, and enjoyment of our home. The proposed scheme would be overbearing, resulting in an unacceptable sense of oppressive enclosure. It will actually box me in on 3 sides. It would be overshadowing of the primary rooms of my house and garden. This would seriously harm my amenity and well-being. I'm talking about my home here. The proposal is not neighbourly. It very much conflicts with the council's policies and guidance on such matters, and as such, many of my neighbours have objected to the proposal. The proposed scheme would surely conflict with the council's aims regarding neighbourliness. The council has a very clear policy and well-publicised philosophy to work with residents. In this case, we have not been consulted on the recently amended plans on an application that has been around for well over 2 years. Surely this is not fair, reasonable, neighbourly, or in any way acceptable. For all these reasons, I respectfully ask the committee to refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Nova. Thank you for your time. Now we move on to the second speaker, which is Shahram Sabari. If whenever you're ready, you can come to the front, and you also have 3 minutes. And I think the mic is still on, so you can begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words in support of 1A Ravenscourt Road. We acquired the derelict property some 7 years ago. At the time, I intended to develop it as my office, as both my daughters attended Latin Upper School. However, they have now left to go to university, and I have obtained alternative premises in the interim. As you are aware, it has taken me many years and appeals to finally get consent for development that was finally granted in August 2023. It is important to note that the consent to develop, which has already been given, approves the current design, size, and the height of the building as set out in the plans before you. The application is just for a change of use from office to C3 residential. The proposed structure, its height, mass, and design has not changed from that which has already been approved, save that it is slightly smaller on the left-hand side to make the garden a bit bigger for the residential use. The application was submitted in 2022. It is now 2024, and we urgently need a decision. Plainly, a residential building dovetails with the rest of the buildings on the street, and as the buildings plan have already been approved, I would be extremely grateful if you could please approve the change of use. It would be in the best interest of the street and the community that the building is no longer derelict, and so that the work can commence and the building restored as it should be, as a residential home, which has the obvious benefit of supporting the council's need for more residential housing. Thank you much for your time.
Thank you very much, Shahram. If you'd like to return to your seat, thanks for your time. And finally, Councillor Collins, when you're ready, if you come to the front, you do have unlimited time. We would appreciate your brevity, but as the ward councillor, you do have unlimited time. So go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah. So I'm speaking for the residents and other residents who've all opposed this planning application. And I have attended the committee today to speak on behalf of the residents of Ravenscourt Road as well, but in particular Nova Gala, who lives at number 1 Ravenscourt Road. Nova lived at this address for many years with her husband, John, who recently passed away. She's still living there. And I met Nova and John when I first became ward councillor in Ravenscourt area in 2022. And Nova explained at the time about the ongoing planning problems her and her husband had to deal with regarding this application. She and other residents have spent many years fighting this planning application, which has been a terrible strain on all concerned. The unique style of Nova's house, with her garden on the left-hand side of the property and the main source of light into her building coming from the south, where that is, makes her opposition to this application quite unique. Most gardens are at the back or the front of a property, but at the back of Nova's house is this huge wall belonging to the Polish Centre. I think it's about 40 foot high. And the wall cuts off all light to Nova's house from that direction, from the west. I think, bear with me if these are the wrong coordinates, but you get the idea. Therefore, the only source of light into the property is from the south, where the proposed application is seeking to build a large residential property. This property would, if built, cut off the only other source of light to Nova's home, especially if it were higher than 1 story. And the houses in Ravenscourt Road are early Victorian, and the area layout was of quite a different style compared to today's busy, overdeveloped area. The planning application seeks to build on what would have been originally an alleyway, according to the residents. And it was before the main roads were going through, so that it was mostly around the church, these little properties were. Additionally, the issue of massing and design have not considered the impact on the road design and the special layout of this particular area. The many neighbours who oppose this application are also upset. They and Nova considered that application to be unneighbourly. They have been unable to speak with the developer or any representatives, I've been told. There is also the issue of a lack of notice regarding this latest proposal. The result of the short notice means that residents and Nova have had no time to fully prepare for this planning committee. Could the application as well, if possible, be put back to allow residents time to prepare their case? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Collins. Thanks for your time. If you wouldn't mind turning it off, actually, Councillor Collins, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you to all the speakers for their time. Now we're going to move on to questions to officers from committee members. So are there any committee members that would like to start the questioning? Yeah, Councillor Souslis.
Thank you. I read in the papers how in the previous appeal decision, reference was made on the neighbouring amenity for number 1 Ravenscourt Road, and how the appeal was allowed, if I understand correctly, or reference was made. How does that affect us in this decision? And would we be, if let's say you were to refuse this application on the grounds of neighbouring amenity, is this even something we can do, or are we bound because of what happened on the previous application stage?
I mean, the previous appeal decision, say from August last year, is a material consideration. We're talking about a building that is the same scale and massing, has the same impact on the neighbouring property. The only real difference in this case is that it would be used as a residential property rather than as an office.
I would add through the chair that it is committee's discretion to take a different view. I would say, though, that we have had costs against us on appeals where the inspectorate has not been convinced by why we took a different view to a previous appeal decision. So you do run, unless there's a clear rationale presented as to why, in this instance, we still felt there was harm on amenity despite an inspector's decision, feeling there wasn't on a similar scheme or even identical, obviously be more vulnerable. You'd have to have, if you like, convincing justification for why we took a different view to the previous inspector, or we are vulnerable to costs.
Thank you. And just to follow up, we do consider this to be, apart from the different use, an identical scheme with regards to these particular issues. Is that correct in terms of the height and the walls and everything? So that you would consider this scheme, or it would be considered to be identical in terms of the layouts, even though the use is different and it's residential this time, it would be considered for as far as appeals and the inspectorate would be concerned.
No, I don't think that would be any different. I mean, the design, the scale and massing, its relationship to the neighbouring property is exactly the same. And I mean, these are things that have been considered by the planning inspectorate over a number of appeals. I mean, the one last year was only the latest one. We have tried on a number of occasions dealing with matters such as daylight and sunlight, overdevelopment, overbearing, and you know, the various iterations of the scheme have revised and amended these, and the inspector had recognised this, the inspectors have recognised this. Yeah, but it is identical to the one that was approved last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you believe that this scheme is identical in terms of height, mass and design, and you believe that the planning inspectorate would also make that same judgment?
That would be that's my opinion, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to follow up on Councillor Souslou's question around the previous determination by the planning inspectorate. And am I right to understand the previous determination was for commercial use?
That is correct. It was for an office use.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to pick your brains around the so the representation for this application said that we were approving a change of use. That's not the case, is it?
No, it's not. It's not as such. It is for redevelopment of the site for use as a residential property. It is the same scheme effectively in terms visually, etc. But just the use is different. But it is for a redevelopment, not just a change of use.
Thank you. And so I'm trying to understand the weighing of the loss of employment versus the gain of housing. So if we lose 2 or 3 employments, but we gain a house with 3 bedrooms and I think they're double beds each, but I can't imagine it would be 3 couples living in this. What is the way? Sort of we're losing employment that seems to be fine compared to the gain of housing.
We do look to retain employment space. That employment space isn't there at the moment. There's a building, single-story building that has been employment used, but obviously it's in very poor condition, can't be used at the moment. There is a permission for an office space, but it's not there as such. So, I mean, I think it's a balance really we have to look at, and I think the size and scale of the development is considered acceptable. I think on balance, officers consider that the residential use in this primarily residential street will be more beneficial.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And then I'm trying to understand on page 29 of the report, it said that the applicant had confirmed in writing that when they acquired the building in August 2017, it was vacant and dilapidated at the time of purchase. And I was wondering if you could tell us more about this, because I don't know, I'm not an expert, just saying I am looking at Google Earth and I don't know when the image is from. So again, it doesn't look dilapidated to me. And this says, I don't think Google Earth has pictures from back in 2017. So if you could tell us more about this. In fact, the image is from 2020 and this site looks quite different from what I'm seeing. I'm sort of inclined to think, is the dilapidation a bit sort of staged, or were we able to get in there at the time?
Yeah, these images are when the case officer visited the site. They considered it was in very poor condition. The use as an office was only actually confirmed in October 2014. There was a certificate. There was no particular use for that building, and a certificate of lawfulness was granted, where they indicated had been used as offices with a yard. That was in October 2014, but I don't think there has been used that much since that point, I'm afraid.
That's really helpful. But then how do we sort of take protections against developers who would think, well, I'm just going to let my building kind of, collapse. I'm not going to upkeep it at all. And then when it comes to planning determination, I'll just say that no one's working there and it's crumbling really. Don't you want to replace it with something shiny and new?
Yeah, I mean, we do try and take note of that, where we feel if a building's been deliberately left to go to rot or to decay. I've got no evidence before me that is the case here. It was quite, I think, dilapidated when the certificate of lawfulness was approved some 10 years ago. And yeah, I mean, but if we were to be made aware that something was being left just to rot, we certainly would give significant weight to that. We just have to look at the moment. Yes, there is a permission for an office there. That came from the applicant. I think was going to use it for themselves, but that, because it's dragged out, they've found other accommodation now. So, but I think on balance, the loss of the space would require significant renovation to be provide quality accommodation, and I think, you know, in that street, in the area, it'd be more beneficial to have the house.
I would add through the chair that this is, or it certainly doesn't strike us as a typical location for office use. It looks a more kind of historical case that office use was taking place there, and it's unlikely that this would be the type of site and location where a landowner would purposely run it into the ground and leave it vacant just for the sole purpose of using that as a leverage, if you like, or added weight to change it to residential. We certainly are tuned into those instances where landowners may perhaps embark on a route like that when you've got larger sites in perhaps more commercial areas, where we would probably apply the policy around, you know, identifying why it wasn't viable to keep it in employment use when they're kind of in more accessible locations with good public transport. They're likely to provide, you know, large numbers of employment and so forth. A site such as this wouldn't be that typical site where we would forensically interrogate to look as to why it was vacant and why there wasn't more effort to bring it into an office use.
Thank you. That's really good. And from a basic, very basic search, I can't find anything on Companies House that would suggest there had been a business when the applicants and there wasn't. Would our looking into the matter that you've explained also include looking at whether business rates were paid from that site?
Through the chair, no, I'm not aware that we did any research of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I come to you, Councillor Walsh, I do have some questions off the back of Councillor Chawat-Verdier's questions. To your knowledge, and I appreciate you might not know this here and now, have any representations been received from residents to either the planning enforcement team or environmental health about the dilapidation of the site? I mean, that would be a good way of just knowing for sure.
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Okay. And with regards to the change of use question, so technically, this is not a change of use application, as we know, but you're saying because the proposed scheme is essentially the same, or you believe it to be identical to the previous one, it's essentially a change of use application, but not technically a change of use application. Would you say that's fair?
I mean, you could put it that way, but I mean, I would still have to emphasise it is a redevelopment of the site to provide a residential house.
Matt?
Through the chair, our legal colleague might also have a view. I'm not sure if you would class this as abandonment of the use and how long it has been vacant. You get to a point where you can determine that the use has been abandoned because it hasn't been used as its previous authorised use. I'm not sure if that's the case here. Us as officers in determining this application found that would be a fairly academic exercise in any event. We don't consider that it's ideal for office location. Clearly now it's in such a state where the viability of investing in it for office use would be questionable. Residential location would arguably be more appropriate, and that's how we feel. So we haven't certainly sought to interrogate it beyond that and see it probably more as a technicality than anything else. And we've addressed the whole issue of the office space within the report. So we feel members are fully aware of the fact that it was a previous office use and that was obviously be lost.
Yes, thank you. No, just clarifying what Councillor Chawat-Verdier had asked, but that's clear for me. And when were these pictures taken? Do you know?
The pictures would have been taken between 2022 and 2023, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Legal, did you want to come in?
Yes, just to explain, it would have been a change of use if the 2023 permission had been implemented and all they were doing was just changing the use. However, what you have before you is that building there, what is there now, and some operational work will be necessary to bring it to the 2023 structure and then to use it. So it's a combination of operational development and a change of use. So.
Okay, thank you. And so it's worth asking, the previous application was approved on appeal. So if we here today refuse this application, the applicant still has the right to build that application.
They do, yes, that
Yeah.
permission is valid until August 26th.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to start off by just following on regarding some of the points that were raised by our speakers this evening. Firstly, as was raised by Councillor Collins and the resident regarding consultation on this scheme. Now, as I understand it, it is typical for site notices to be posted and for neighbours in the immediate vicinity to be notified of such matters. Could you please speak to this and any details you have in terms of when site notices would have been posted and if neighbours had been informed of such matters?
I mean, the application was publicised by means of a press notice and a site notice. I cannot say where exactly the notice was posted, but it would generally be within the vicinity of the site. Also, I think 47 letters were sent to neighbouring properties to notify them of the application. And as a result of that, we had 21 objections from 12 different properties, which are summarised in the report.
And just as a point of clarification, obviously there was the original scheme and then obviously this new application. Would a new site notice have been necessary for this, or would the one from the original office use application have sufficed?
No, there was fresh letters and site and press notice for this application. They're different entities dealt with in their own right.
Okay. And then in terms of the other matter I want to ask was about the issue of the loss of light. Could you, obviously in the pictures you've shown, there's a living room or a kitchen that faces where the development is proposed. Could you speak as to the calculations that were taken and the measurements of the current levels of light and the effects of the construction and the future levels of light that could be expected in those living facilities?
Yes. Excuse me. I mean, a daylight and sunlight report was submitted with this and with the office application. You know, there's no deny there is an impact on light, but the impacts are within the allowances within the BRE guidelines, and this factor was recognised by the planning inspector in their appeal decision that whilst there was an impact, it was not such that would warrant withholding permission on this implementation. On some of the earlier iterations of a scheme, there were.
Could you elaborate further on that in terms of the loss of light levels? Obviously, as you say, it's within the guidance. Could you elaborate further on what would constitute an acceptable loss of light level?
Generally speaking, if you lost more than 20% of the existing light, then that is somewhere where you would generally have to take a very close look and take a view on it. I mean, this application did not breach those. There is one window which would experience a loss of annual sunlight hours, which is consistent with the application, but it was within the range deemed acceptable in the BRE guidelines. So, you know, up to 20% you can lose without having a drastic impact. And to be honest, in many cases you can lose a greater percentage than that, because the guidelines, whilst they're not but they're not perfect for in a London sort of location. They're more geared towards sort of suburban living. But, you know, this is has the same impact in daylight as the appeal scheme that was allowed last year. And we felt that there would not be any justification to withhold permission on those grounds.
Do you have a specific number? You say 20% is the range. Do you have a specific number on the percentage of light loss?
I don't have a specific number in the report at the moment, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Trey.
Yeah, can I follow on from that? Because we've seen we've seen very similar questions before at committee, and the measurements have been exact. You know, we've talked about 45-degree angles. We've gone into the minutiae. And what I don't understand from this is I've got absolutely no idea from this presentation about what the impact would be on the neighbour. There's, showing through the window, you could have created some sort of CGI to show the impact on the neighbour, and we don't get the scale of how far the wall and the roof is going to impact on the neighbour. Now, I know we're saying that this was agreed as an office space, but we have very specific words about encroachment. And if this neighbour's garden is going to be critically encroached upon and her light encroached upon so that her living experience is very much changed, then surely we have the right to question that.
Yeah, I mean, the baseline with sort of daylight and sunlight, you would take a line in the midpoint of the nearest window at 25 degrees, and if the structure impacted on that line, then you would need to do a more detailed test. I mean, I've looked at that today. The 25-degree line from that kitchen window would not clip the proposed building. So therefore, there would not be a need to do any more detailed tests. I mean, the impact of daylight and sunlight have been considered over many of the iteration of the application, and certainly in the earlier schemes there were concerns about that. But that has largely been resolved. The two-story, the two-story element here is situated some 11 meters away from the neighbouring window, and the proximity of that has been concluded before by officers and by the inspectorate that it is not overbearing. It's not considered to be overbearing. It's not considered to dominate the impacts on the property.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I could point colleagues to page 33 of the report, and specifically point 628, in which it says an interior daylight analysis, issue 1 dated 25th of April 2024, prepared by Adverse Limited, has been submitted as part of this application. This has assessed the level of internal light received to habitable rooms within the proposed residential dwelling against the report demonstrates the provision of light to the habitable rooms to the proposed residential dwelling would comply.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor, that refers to the lighting for the proposed building, that paragraph.
Are you talking about the other house?
So, Councillor Trey, are you talking about what's there now?
I'm talking about the impact on the neighbour of the proposed development, and what I wasn't able to see from this presentation, which I was quite clearly able to see at the last committee meeting, was the impact from the window of the person that was being impacted, the angle that we would see that roof. Remember when we were doing the air source heat pumps? You could see what angle it would come in at. Now, I appreciate that nothing has changed since the last, but we can see over the 10 years of the different iterations that they have been forced to come down and down. And so it does occur to me that each planning application pushes it to the very limit of acceptability. So we do have to ask the question whether this is a practical acceptable level. and I do understand the other implications. So I just want to be clear that this is within the range that we would consider acceptable if there weren't any other things to consider.
Thank you. And just to clarify again, the point on page 33 is in reference to not the scheme that's proposed today. Is that right?
The reference on page 33 is talking about the interior daylight analysis for the development, the house that's been proposed.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that's clear. Yeah, Councillor Swartz-Verdier.
But then there's another one on 38, 653. In fact, 652, which says in excess of that's for the house that we're talking about. All the remaining tested rooms will experience good levels of sunlight in excess of BRE targets. So does that answer the question?
That is correct. That refers to the earlier appeal decision in terms of one in March 2022, where the planning inspector considered in terms of the impact on sunlight to the garden would not be unreasonably compromised. And then with regards to the appeal in August 2023, in the paragraph above 6.52, where the inspectorate considered that the sunlight results show all, apart from one window, but the sunlight for all remaining tested rooms experience good levels of sunlight in the proposed condition in excess of the BRE target of at least 25% for total annual levels and 5% for winter.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pascoe-Tiberi.
Thank you very much. In planning rules, there's obviously a difference between what loss of sunlight is deemed acceptable in a room and what is deemed acceptable in a garden. And I have every sympathy with people who feel threatened by the loss of sunlight in a garden. Could you remind us, because it's kind of slipped my mind, what is and isn't considered acceptable for loss of sunlight to a garden?
Again, if the loss of sunlight is not more than 20%, then that should be acceptable.
And is that across all of the garden?
That would be across the garden window. I mean, that is the general rule. It is not set in stone in the guidelines. Each case is looked at on its merits. As I say, we're going here from previous refusals where, we considered it would be there would be some reduction in sunlight. The impact would be within the range deemed acceptable in the guidelines. So, a planning inspector would have satisfied the living conditions of number 1 Ravenscourt Road would not be unreasonably compromised due to reduction in light.
Thank you. But is that in the house or the garden?
That is a general statement about the living conditions, but they're referring in terms of both the house and the garden. They're both sort of referred to here. As it says in 6.53, while there'll be some reduction in sunlight to the garden, the degree of impact would be within the range deemed acceptable.
So do you have figures for the impact on the garden?
Sorry?
Do you have figures for the impact of sunlight on the garden?
I don't have those specific figures, no.
Because that would be very useful in helping the committee come to a decision on this point.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. In the letter received, I was struck by the request to around planting and landscaping access across the common boundary, and whether that could be introduced as a planning condition. Would you be able to give me your thoughts and comments on that point, whether it's feasible?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
It refers to the request made in the letter received yesterday about planting and landscaping across the boundaries between 1 and 1A, and whether that could be introduced as a planning condition.
I mean, there certainly is a condition attached relating to pre-commencement details of soft landscaping and hard landscaping. And, you know, we're obviously aware that the neighbours have some concerns about that. I mean, whilst in many cases we wouldn't necessarily notify neighbours on those matters, this would be something, if committee so wished, that we could consult the neighbours on if it were approved and those details were submitted.
And if that were a condition, what would happen in practice? Would it be neighbours being told this is happening? Or
Well, yes,
would there be a
if
genuine
the committee
conversation?
wanted us to notify them on the details of that condition, we would notify once the details were submitted, if the details were submitted, so they could be made aware of it and could review that and let us have their comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this kind of speaks to the point I was making earlier about change of use. So I understand, obviously, technically speaking, this is not a change of use application. This is for a new development. But that in terms of height, mass, impact on sunlight and daylight, this scheme is identical to the scheme that was approved by the Planning Inspectorate, if not slightly smaller. So that if we were to refuse this scheme on the basis of any of those four things, including sunlight and daylight, there's a very real risk that this scheme, because it's identical, will be approved again by the Planning Inspectorate.
I would believe that is the case. I mean, I think it is identical. I think all of the applicant did advise the single-story extension to the south of the site is slightly shorter, so it would have a lesser impact. That's the only difference. The overall height, scale and massing, particularly in relation to number one, remains the same.
Sorry, through the chair, going back to the point around impact on the garden, it is a feature of these pairs of this pair of semis, and then is a separate dwelling house. If you show it, yeah, they given the way that the area is being built out here, none of them have rear gardens. Effectively, you have them to the side of the house. Arguably, the one next door to one does, because they've had this side single-story extension. So the garden technically sits behind that element, but it's indicative of all these properties that they don't have rear gardens. So this application site here, if you like, it's the neighbour at number one arguably has had the luxury, the benefit of having this single-story commercial element next door to them. But to actually maintain that, if you like, benefit that they've had of this site directly due south of them, to maintain it as a single story would perhaps be difficult to argue. To restrict development on that height to single story going forward would be difficult to support. What we have to do and what our job is to get that balance right between, if we are to allow a two-story element on there, that is positioned sufficiently from the rear garden, or the side rear garden, to the adjoining properties, so that balance is struck. Now, the appeal inspector felt that balance had been struck on the previous application that they allowed. We've got no reason to question that judgment, and we certainly feel that the appropriate balance has been struck between allowing where the main two-story element is to the rear of it, so it's almost adjacent to the built element in any event, where it extends into directly south of the neighbour's garden, then it's set away from that boundary quite significantly, and it doesn't extend the whole length either. So we feel it's more than an appropriate balance between allowing these people a second-story element on a site that's always been single-story, while protecting the neighbours at number one in terms of their garden, which happens to be, yes, directly due south of the application site. Sorry, yeah, they're due north. The application is due south of that neighbour.
Okay, thank you. Yep, Councillor Schwartz-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. And so to try and summarize all of this, and considering what everyone has talked about, all the good points that were raised, if there hadn't been the determinations by the Planning Inspectorate, would you still recommend for us to approve this application?
Yes, it has been a material consideration, and it's right, we give it due weight. But regardless of the appeal decision, officers would still be recommending this for approval.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Tray.
I am going to ask a couple more questions because what I'm trying to understand is also the delay of the last 2 years. So if there was planning permission by the inspectorate 2 years ago, then the delay in the build has actually been just the constructor, the development, just deciding to change the use to residential rather than office.
You know, the appeal decision for the office was granted last August in 2023. The appeal process can be quite slow at times. The applicant had submitted an appeal against non-determination for this scheme as well, the residential scheme. However, they submitted their appeal too late, and eventually that appeal was turned away by the planning inspectorate. It wasn't registered as a valid appeal. We had been waiting. We had expected perhaps that the applicant was going to, having achieved a planning permission, would withdraw this application, but following discussions, they said they did want this determined, so therefore we've been working to put it to committee to move it forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm just thinking of, again, of the other examples we've had where we've asked, well, no, where the triangle of last committee, where they actually went down in order to mitigate the effect on the surrounding properties. They actually took half a story down in order to get rid of that height. Any comment on that?
We have had earlier iterations of the scheme which did look for a 2-story plus basement extension. They were turned down due to the overall building itself was taller, and there was considered to be significant work and disruption. Basement works are notoriously noisy, dirty, and do take considerable amount of time. And it wasn't considered that it was necessarily the most appropriate location to introduce basement works on those. I mean, those planning refusals were sort of back 2018 and 2019 as well. And sorry, no, sorry, 2015, the looking 2-story plus basement building. They were withdrawn by the applicants rather than refused because they knew we were not going to support them. So I would still have concerns here that if you were going to introduce given that in officers' views, the second story has been reduced in height over time to such a degree that we feel the impact is acceptable. I think, reducing that and putting a basement floor in would make it a much more unattractive development.
Thanks for that. Appreciate that background.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very quick one for me, which my colleague can't be here today, would shoot me if I didn't ask about. Point number 16 about the construction management plan. Could that have suitable regard to bank holidays as well, please?
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? No, no further questions. Okay, in that case, we'll move on to voting. Firstly, we'll vote on recommendation 1, which is on page 11 of the report. Councillor Walsh, are you voting for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Sisters?
For.
Councillor Tray?
For.
Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Chabot-Verdier?
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibere?
For.
I'll also be voting for, so recommendation 1 has been approved. Now we vote on recommendation 2, which is also on page 11. Councillor Walsh?
For.
Councillor Sisters?
For.
Councillor Tray?
For.
Councillor Melton?
For.
Councillor Chabot-Verdier?
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibere?
For.
I'll also be voting for, so that application has been approved. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your time. Now we move on to item 5, which is 153 Hurlingham Road. And Roy, whenever you're ready, could you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, just technical difficulties. Okay, so this application, it relates to an advertisement application for 5 advertisement signs on a commercial building. The proposal relates to 5 signs, as I mentioned already. There are some on the north elevation in Hurlingham Road. There are some on the east elevation, or there's one on the east elevation, and then a couple more on the west elevation. And that should become apparent through the presentation where those are. So this is a site. On the left-hand side, you can see the map, the location plan, the site highlighted in red. The frontage is on Hurlingham Road, and the site is adjacent to the railway sidings, or is in the railway sidings, as well as the frontage along Hurlingham Road, and is adjacent to the railway viaduct. You can see the image on the right-hand side where the buildings are the former Magnet store, which I say is on Hurlingham Road frontage, and opposite there are some commercial buildings, which are known as 164 Hurlingham Road, which was recently the subject of a planning application which came to committee for a care home. The site is quite a deep site which runs alongside the railway sidings, but the adverts are at the front of the site, mainly in the area adjacent to the railway viaduct, with one non-illuminated sign facing Edenhurst Avenue. Just for context, it's important to take into consideration the site is not in a conservation area, but is adjacent to a conservation area. So the area highlighted in white, if you like, falls outside the conservation areas. All the areas in green are in conservation areas. So this is adjacent to the Hurlingham conservation area. And the green line you see here is essentially the railway line. The other side of the railway line is the Putney Bridge conservation area. And on the bottom, there's an image which is along Hurlingham Road, which is looking east. And the reason for showing that is because the building that's there in white is a building of merit. That's 160 Hurlingham Road. It's come to the elevations, so a kind of before and after scenario. So the image at the top is the existing image. So you've got some signage along the building here at high level. And also where that canopy was adjacent to the railway line at the right-hand side. And then the image below is where the proposed signage would be, where it says Green Goat Storage, and then a sort of a logo badge, which is highlighted at the very bottom of the screen to give you a bit of an idea of what it might look like. And then this is the elevation facing Edenhurst Avenue, which is the residential opposite side of the road. Again, at high level, you have a signage shown here and some signage at lower level. Proposal is to remove the existing signage and put a non-illuminated sign facing on that elevation. This is the west elevation. So this is the elevation which is like inward towards the site, and it actually faces the railway viaduct. So there is some signage proposed at the frontage. And I should add that some of this has actually already been implemented. So it came in as an application, but some of it's actually already been implemented. That should come out again in the photographs which follow. So you can see that on the right-hand side, the image at the bottom, that's what was existing. That's the Magnet building that was subject to a planning application, granted permission for some changes to put some cladding on the building in connection with its change of use as a storage unit. And you can see, obviously, the cladding has now been installed as per the permission, and now they're looking to put some signage on in connection with that storage use. And that sign there is a green goat storage is the one that's on the Hurlingham Road frontage. That logo sign on the right-hand side is actually on the west elevation, sorry, facing the railway viaduct. And although it looks illuminated inside, that is actually a lamppost. So it's not actually the illumination from the advert itself. And then this one again is on the left-hand side, is existing as it was the Magnet. And there is a car park in the sort of foreground, which splits the space between the residential and the opposite side of the road. And you've got 2 images on the right-hand side of what's there at the moment. So you can see that the Green Goat storage sign has been installed on that elevation facing Edenhurst. And this is just a night and day image to show the difference. You can sort of see in the image, it looks a little bit darker on the bottom image. So just coming into consultation, we've had 22 objections to this proposal, and this is a summary which is in the report on page 50. Main sort of concerns, just pick out a few of them, were to do with light pollution from the illumination of the proposed advertising. I think I should just make clear that, just go back to one aerial shot. So you can see here the footprint of the building. There would be an advert on that corner of the building, and there is a car park, and there is a line of trees, and then you get to the closest property, which is 1 Edenhurst Avenue, which is some 32 meters away. And the advert proposals, when they came in originally, included an illuminated sign on that elevation. That advert has been altered to remove the illumination. It's the same sign, but the advertising has been removed. And the concerns then in terms of pollution or light pollution to those residents has been removed. So all the other signs, if you like, are in this location, which is at the junction with the railway viaduct opposite the commercial building, which is obviously a commercial setting as you move into underneath the bridge towards Putney Bridge. Go back. Yeah, again, so there's been some concerns raised about the impact of light on the residential area. I've just covered that. Also, there's been some concerns about illumination to the conservation area. And again, although it's in a not in a conservation, it's adjacent to conservation, it's considered that the scale and size of these is not going to be harmful to either the residential area or the conservation area. And there would be conditions attached to restrict the hours of use and the level of lightings, and they are deemed to be satisfactory. Also, because it's adjacent to the railway line at a higher level, there was, concern potentially from London Underground, who are responsible obviously for the railway viaducts and the trains that go along that. They had no objections to the proposal, subject to a condition to ensure that the signage was installed in a satisfactory manner, and that's been secured by a condition. And then all of the other references there again are addressed in the report. The most significant, I think, is that reconsultation was carried out as a result of the amendments that were done to the proposal. Notably, the illumination on Edenhurst Avenue was removed. The hours of use were restricted so that the hours coincide with the opening hours of use for the facility. And also there are light levels restrictions which would apply, which are in industry-wide standard. And as a result of that reconsultation, 6 objections were withdrawn, but still remain to be a significant number. So in summary, we feel that the 4 illuminated signs adjacent to the railway, that's part of a commercial setting. The 1 non-illuminated sign is 32 meters away from the closest residential and wouldn't have any harm. In terms of design and appearance, this proposed signage is acceptable scale. It wouldn't clutter and it fits into the context of the building that's existing. It wouldn't harm the adjacent conservation area. It wouldn't harm the building of merit. And then we come into the neighbour amenity, no harm, subject to the conditions. And there are no high-rise objections. And there was some reference to impact on ecology, bats, etc. And our colleagues in the ecology team looked at the proposals and were satisfied that there would be no adverse impact. And again, that's covered in the report. Okay. So based on that, we are recommending that the application be approved. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Roy, thank you very much. Just to clarify, once again, the east elevation has a non-illuminated sign.
That's correct, yes.
And the east elevation is the one that's facing residential properties.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Schwartz-Verdier, and then we'll go to Councillor Pascal-Touberay.
Thank you, Chair. Look, you've made very clear in the report that there's only so much we can do because of the type, the size, etc. But this is the type of thing that it feels like voting for a pulpit in the current climate that we all know. I mean, it is nonsensical. I'm gonna explain. I've looked at the requested hours and I've looked at the opening hours. So, for some reason, there's a need to have those signs illuminated a full hour and a half before the site opens. Then, for instance, somehow the hours requested on Thursdays, even though it closes at 6, the hour requested is still 8. But that's not the hours of the new site, that's the hours of the old site. So they need their lights on on Thursdays for an extra 2 hours, not on Wednesdays, just Thursdays. They won't be open until then anyway. Look, on this committee, we vote passive house stuff. You know, the councillors mentioned pumps and stuff. And we all strive to achieve net zero, carbon neutral, yada, yada, yada. And then we vote for this. It just, sorry, I just cannot understand. And then if they don't, there's no need to have those lights on when you're not open. You're not attracting, who walks past the storage side and thinks, oh, I need storage now. But then also, if we restrict it to the opening hours, I mean, I know we live in England and sometimes we get 10 minutes of daylight a day in some seasons, but nonetheless, what's the point in the summer of having those signs on from 9 to 6? Sorry, from 8 to 6 on a Saturday? Okay, it just makes no sense. You don't necessarily have to respond to my outrage, but in terms of, look, I appreciate it's small signs, yada, 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 but small plus small plus small plus small plus small means that actually we go counter current in this borough when in terms of our climate commitments. So why are we letting this happen?
Okay, so we have to consider every application on its own merits against the policies and the plan. That's what our obligation is to do, and that's what we're doing in respect to this. We haven't sought this application to come through, but the significant thing for us as officers is that there was a change of use that was allowed for this site. So clearly the magnet has been there. It's been there for a long time. It closed and the building was vacant. The applicant was looking to do other things with the building. One of the things they were looking to do was to add 2 extra stories on top of the existing magnet building to create some more residential units. We were in discussions with them about that, and we were trying to get some affordable housing. In the end, it went to a non-determination appeal. And then the applicant, on their own behalf, spoke with residents, and the residents said they would prefer to see an alternative scheme on the site, which was for a change of use. And that change of use is what you see before you in this building, this storage use. And that was their preferred option. And based on that, they then submitted an application for the change of use, which we approved on the basis that they would then withdraw the appeal for the residential unit. They withdrew the residential proposals, and then we're left obviously now with this current proposal, which is for the change of use, which is a lesser evil, if you like. That's the kind of context. But then when you're looking at the building itself, it's essentially the same building with some alterations to it. And you can see on the image that it shows quite clear that the bottom image, for example, is a nighttime scenario, and you can see the elevation facing Edenhurst, which is the one that's pertinent, I think, faces Edenhurst, and it's not illuminated. So it's not, overly lit in any shape or form whatsoever. And then you go to the other end, if you like, where it's a more commercial setting against the backdrop of the railway line. And then you've got on the opposite side of the road, more commercial buildings, which I think I showed. Yeah. So there are commercial buildings on the opposite side of the road, which again, it's a commercial setting. So it's appropriate to have signage on commercial buildings. So when you look at the hours, and this is where it comes back to, is that it's a business and they are there to obviously run their operation. And to facilitate that, they need some signage on the building. And so from our perspective, there's some opening hours which have been agreed and are pertinent to the change of use. The same opening hours that were approved are consistent with the advertising hours. So the adverts will only be turned on whilst the business is in operation. And it's entirely up to the applicant if they choose to turn on the advert on during the day when they probably don't need to, whereas the best time would be to turn them on at night, presumably when people can't see them. And the reason why I think the hours are slightly later on a Thursday is because they have late night opening on a Thursday, which was consistent with the previous use, which was the magnet.
Thank you, Chair. So 3 follow-ups on this. The first is, no, the advertised hours on Google, which I would assume is factual, is 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. weekdays. Their requested hours are 7:30 till 6, and then somehow again 7:30 till 8 p.m. on a Thursday. And then for Sunday, actually Sunday, the requested hours match the opening hours. So that's the first observation. The second is we have traded a scheme that could help tackle the housing crisis for a scheme that is going to make the climate crisis worse. Is that correct? And then the final question is, you say commercial buildings across the road, but then that's not the case because that's going to be a scheme that we've voted on.
Okay, so again, just going back to the hours. So whilst I appreciate that what's advertised on Google might be what they say on Google, but in terms of planning permission that was granted, the hours are the same. So if you look at paragraph 3.19 in the report, you can see the hours there are stated very clearly, and those hours are exactly the same as those hours which are being proposed in the application form that's in front of you today. So there's no difference. So if you look at the paragraph 3.13 and paragraph 3.19, the hours are exactly the same. There's absolutely no difference. If they choose to operate within those hours, they can do. If they choose to operate the maximum allowable, then they could do that as well. So I'm not privy to Google at the moment, but certainly that's the case. When it comes to the matters of climate change, I was really trying to set a context that things have changed. You know, we have to consider every application on its merits. And as part of doing that, the applicant was trying to work with residents. We were trying to encourage them to work with residents. And this preferred scheme, as part of that process of trying to work with residents was to actually, go down the route of this proposal, which was for the change of use. That's not to say that they couldn't have pursued the other option as well. So it's just really just providing that bit of context. And then, sorry, I can't read my own writing. What was the last point? Sorry.
And the last point was about the commercial buildings across the road, but then that's not going to stay. And in fact, have we measured the impact of that can have on the particular group of residents who will be living across the road?
Yeah, sorry. So yes, absolutely right. But again, a permission is live for 3 years. We're still working through the Section 106 on that. And obviously there will be some time before anything happens on the site, but at the end of the day, nothing has been commenced and we have to look at it as it stands. And as it stands, it's a commercial site and that's what we're looking at in its existing use. So again, if you look at the image on the bottom, the context for it is that it's a commercial location and that's what you would expect to see, some appropriate signage. And the signage that's being proposed is going to be quite, if you like, low impact. The energy levels, I think, if you look at page 300, so paragraph 330, there's some specific wording there which talks about, the concerns that were raised about, signage during daylight hours and waste of energy. And specifically, this is not a major application, not a major proposal. There's no policy requirement to carry out an energy assessment, but notwithstanding that, the applicant has confirmed that illumination will be with low voltage LED signage. Also, the voltage will range between 12 volts and 24 volts, which will be set on timers. And then the hours are controlled as per the conditions which I referred to in the report. So overall, it's considered that the amount of energy use is not unreasonable in this case.
I would just, through the chair, I would just also raise the point that given the location of this business, it's not in the town centre or an obvious commercial area as such, and we could see the rationale for the applicant wanting to have some form of illumination to, hopefully improve its presence within the area that it is going to catch the eye and be more likely that people will notice it, and that will obviously help towards the vitality and commercial viability of it and the people it employs. It is important to get that balance right, though, so it's not excessive illumination which would be harmful to neighbouring amenities. So various revisions have been sought through the application process, and there's controls through the conditions around the level of illumination and the hours that are illuminated and the location and positioning and scale and appearance and everything else of the advert. So we think it strikes that comfortable balance between allowing the organisation to increase its presence in the area, as I say, not an obvious area where people are likely to be shopping per se, while protecting residential amenity, and we think this is about right. In terms of the energy aspects, it's a very good point. And as we go through our local plan review with the whole climate change agenda and increasing focus and priority around climate change and the whole topic, may well be that we introduce policies when it comes to adverts and illumination, where we do seek comfort around what energy sources they'll be using, and giving us a position where we can actually insist on sustainable forms of energy in that respect. Currently, we don't have that, but that's not to say it's not something we still can't consider now as something material, because it has been raised by objectors. I guess our point is we wouldn't have had any policy footing to have pushed that point with the applicant, and certainly not to have objected to the application on those grounds.
Sorry, Chair, I'd just like to add that this is an advertisement consent, and the criteria is visual amenity and public safety. And so you need to just keep that in mind when you're considering the application. You know, is it harming the amenity of the area, the character, historical buildings, and is there a public safety element to this?
Look, in closing, I'll make 2 points to colleagues. First, the hours on the website are, as I've said, on Google. And the second point, I mean, look, and this is behind a literal light pole. What more illumination do you need? So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would also prefer a residential scheme instead of this, but the applicant withdrew the residential scheme. It's not as if the council is favouring this over a residential scheme. So I think that's the first point that I would make. Also, I think it's important to note that the hours within which a business is allowed to turn on their lights doesn't necessarily mean they will have their lights on for all those hours. And I'd go as far as to say it wouldn't make business sense for them to have the lights on that whole time. And Roy, you mentioned something about timers. Could you just clarify that point?
Yeah, the lighting that's proposed would be on timers, so they obviously go off, when they need to go off when it's light. Presumably when it gets dark, they can come on again, but they would be on timers anyway. Again, that saves energy, which is good. And as Matt said, obviously we don't have any policies at the moment, but that may change in the future. And I think the point that Miralini made was really pertinent as well, that the legislation requires that we should normally just look at highways and public safety. Sorry, visual amenity and public safety. So thank you.
And not energy.
And not energy.
Yeah. And again, for me, the most important point is the east elevation, which faces the residential buildings, is non-illuminated. Anyone else? Any other questions? No?
Nope.
Okay. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Trey.
I'm just going to ask, who is going to see the illuminated signs? What is the purpose of the advertisement if it's in a commercial that the only people going past it are going to be other commercial? Can you see it from the tube? Can you?
I'm sure you could probably see it from the tube, but probably the trains are going that fast, you probably wouldn't see them unless they were stopped on the track. But I mean, the bottom line is that it's a commercial building, and so normally if you have a shop, we would have a fascia sign, and this is a commercial building which Hurlingham Road sort of transitions. So if you go from Putney Bridge and you go towards, if you go, is it west, sorry. If you go, let's just make sure I've got my dimensions. Yeah, so you can see on the left-hand side, there's the map, and the railway viaduct is obviously on the left-hand side. And then when you're going along Hurlingham Road, once you get past that triangular site, which is a 164, it starts to become more residential, so it changes. But you're still at the commercial end of the road, so cars going past, it's a business, they just want to raise their presence, and that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Yep, Councillor Melton.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation for other committee members on energy use. A 12-volt LED bulb uses on for an average of 8 hours a day, uses about 0.16 kilowatt hours of energy a day. When you compare that to an average home, according to ENA or Energy UK figures, that's around 10 kilowatt hours a day that the average home uses. So we're talking about signage that uses less than 62 times less the of the energy of a residential property. So while I share the committee's support wherever possible, where we can build affordable homes in this borough whenever possible, I would argue that a climate-based or energy-based objection to this particular development or approval is maybe moot.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Melton, for your comment. Anyone else? Any other questions? No? Okay, now we'll move on to voting. First, we'll vote on recommendation 1, which is on page 46. Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Sisters.
For.
Councillor Trey.
For.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Schwartz-Verdier.
Against.
Councillor Pascu-Tibure.
For.
Now also be voting for. So recommendation 1 has been approved. Now we vote on recommendation 2, which is also on page 46. Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Sisters.
For.
Councillor Trey.
For.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Schwartz-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibure.
For.
I'll also be voting for. So that application has been approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you everyone for watching and attending tonight's meeting. The draft minutes will be published on the website shortly, and these will be formally approved at the next meeting, which is on the 8th of October 2024. And if you have any questions relating to the reports in the interim, please contact the case officer in the report. Thank you very much. Good evening.